If you know anything about classical music, then you've probably heard people say that orchestral musicians are some of the most unhappy people in the world. In fact, there's a claim going around that they are only second in unhappiness to prison guards. But is that really true? And if not, what are the actual facts? And when you actually look at large-scale studies, such as the General Social Survey, they often do not place orchestral musicians at the very bottom or even sometimes near the very bottom in unhappiness. But when you look at studies which actually look at happiness among orchestral musicians, a very clear pattern emerges. What's the actual truth about this? Stick with me to find out, because although it doesn't appear sometimes in the statistics, what people say about orchestral musicians' happiness tells you something real. There was a big study out of Finland which compared orchestral musicians' working conditions compared to general conditions in other occupations, and some clear facts begin to emerge. Orchestral musicians reported significantly higher exposure to workplace conflict and psychological strain, and they also reported substantially worse environmental conditions, including noise and lighting issues. The important point here is that this is methodical. It's not opinion, and it's not anecdote, and it reports real working condition problems between orchestral musicians and other groups. From the outside, being an orchestral musician may look like a dream. You're playing the music that you love all the time. But could it be that being an orchestral musician puts a lot of stress on you, both physically and psychologically? There is ample research in performing arts medicine which document the sort of conditions that orchestral musicians are under when they play and rehearse. There are many instances of back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, musculoskeletal injuries, repetitive injuries. And of course, this varies by type of instrument, because if you play the violin, you can imagine you would get neck pain here, and that might be different if you play the trumpet or if you're a percussionist. But the thing that's true about all orchestral players is that the levels of physical stress they're put under is higher compared to other groups. This may seem amazing because you would think that playing a musical instrument is a nice little refined thing to do, well, compared to longshoremen, and probably injuries aren't as bad as that. But there are a lot of physical injuries and stressors that you get as an orchestral musician. The bottom line is that in many cases, physical strain in orchestral playing is not the exception, it's quite common. But that's just a physical aspect. What about the psychological aspect? Is there something there to think about as well? Research in journals such as the Psychology of Music show that performance anxiety is a real thing to be considered when looking at orchestral musicians. You may think that performance anxiety wouldn't be a thing when you're performing 50, 60 concerts a year, but it is. I mean, think about it. The truth is that you're constantly being evaluated, yes, even after the audition is done, because you have to meet enormously high standards. If, for example, you play in a rest, the whole audience will hear it, but worse, the conductor will hear it and the personnel manager will hear it. And then there's the hierarchical feedback system, where criticism can be very strong but indirect. Sure, it's not as bad as the days of Toscanini, where he would just point at you and say, "You're fired, you're fired, you're fired." But it's true that, in a way, as they say, the orchestra is the last great example of a dictatorship. What the conductor says goes, that's it. And the principals are all his lieutenants, and you have to listen. They give you the feedback, and you have to follow what they do exactly. And if you fall out of line, and if you don't get it right away, there could be real problems. You could put it this way. In most jobs, you're not required to perform at the absolute top level, 110%, every day, all the time, under constant supervision. The level of unhappiness or dissatisfaction can vary with your role in the orchestra. Section musicians, like string section musicians, they often have a lower level of satisfaction. They feel like they have a desk job with no chance for promotion. They're just a cog in a machine, compared to, say, people in the wind section, where every time they play, it could be a solo, compared to any musician in the orchestra who have other diversified things that they do, such as teaching privately or playing chamber music. But even when people diversify their work, it doesn't automatically translate into higher job satisfaction or better sense of happiness and contentment with your life. But does any of this change when you get into higher level, more well-known orchestras? Is it different for people playing in, say, the Chattanooga Symphony compared to the Berlin Philharmonic or the Philadelphia Orchestra? Well, it often is that as you move up to better, more prestigious orchestras, you can get more job satisfaction because there's more job security, there's higher pay. But remember, it also goes without saying that as you get into those higher level orchestras, the pressures increase. You've got to perform at that level. Audiences are more sophisticated. They expect a higher level of performance. So the paradoxical part about it is, even though you're going up in levels to higher and higher prestige, you don't necessarily get more happy. But one thing is sure, the pressure increases. Orchestral musicians often report a strong sense of identity, a deep sense of meaning and belonging, which you definitely want in your job. But paradoxically, they often report high levels of physical strain and psychological strain. They have challenging work conditions. They often develop problems with their hearing. So if you ask orchestral musicians, do you value what they do? The answer often is yes. But if you ask them, is the day-to-day experience easy? The answer is almost universally going to be no. The underlying thesis being they love being musicians, but they don't like the day-to-day pressures that are bogging them down and causing them real physical and emotional stress. Like I said, there's a very strict hierarchy. There's the conductor, then there's the principals, and then there's everyone else in the section. And you obey without question if you're in that section. The next thing is you play a very highly specialized role, which can be exciting at first, but after a few years may feel repetitive, especially if your orchestra is doing the same repertoire over and over and over again. The other side to that is, in order to survive, like I've said in other videos, lots of orchestras are turning to some strange partnerships in order to keep their music relevant to the people who come or to try to attract new audiences. Musicians train for decades before they can get a job. You could say that doctors start their training in medical school, or maybe if you want to go further, in pre-med in college. But I started music at 3 years old. You could say I've been training my whole life. I can't remember a time when I couldn't read music. And then when orchestral musicians have gone through 10 or 20 or 30 auditions over several years before they land a full-time position, the pressure is on and it doesn't let up their whole career. It's a creative person, a highly trained person that is in a very hierarchical, very strict, very unforgiving position day to day for his whole career. So are orchestral musicians the most unhappy people in the universe? Are they as unhappy as prison guards or sanitation workers? Well, there's no hard evidence to show that. But the research does point to something more nuanced and arguably more interesting. This is a field where people can deeply love what they do, but struggle with how they have to do it. And that tension never really disappears. But I'm really interested to know, are you an orchestral musician? And if so, what has been your experience? And if you're just a music lover, have you perceived any of these things? Have you heard it from any of the musicians in your life? Let me know in the comments. I can't wait to hear what you say. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.